Dick was okay.
No.
I made the rule.
No.
We changed it.
I'll remember that.
When does the cage come down? I've got my folding chair ready.
So the rule was do whatever you want to do if you're the guy that made the rule, because apparently that's the way the rules go.
I'm muting now.
That might not be a bad solution. All right, so we're live on the tubes. If anybody wants to share where we are on Facebook, there's a little link right up there. You can just hit copy and put it on your Facebook and share it with your 36 friends who won't really care probably, because this is only interesting to us. And so, let's see. We'll just hit this and hit this.
Yeah, well, that's like just your opinion, man.
All right, so welcome to the Audio Opinion Show, where audio guys and gals, just didn't get any gals today, gather to talk about their opinions about stuff, because that's one thing that audio people have in spades, is lots and lots of opinions. So I'm joined today by my friends Andy, Dave, Timothy, Joe, Pete, Nathan, Ed/Riley, Mac, Carl, and Tom, because that's what he's going to be. So Tom, and most of the folks in this panel are mostly Sound Reinforcement Live guys. We've got a couple of broadcast folks in the mix. It should be an interesting and fun thing. So if you are watching this on YouTube and you're wondering how to get in on this, make a comment on there and I'll tell you how to get in on it. If you are still trying to get in and you didn't make it in time and you didn't ask me about it ahead of time, which is what Jason did, which is why I just let him in, make sure you get here before 5 minutes till on the next show. We'd be happy to have you. So welcome, Jason. So we're going to start with our, I didn't do new questions for the poll. So I've got enough new people. We've got enough new people. So we're going to go, what is your favorite Princess Bride quote? Is it inconceivable, or boo, 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 or marriage? Marriage is what brings us together. Or hello, my name is Inigo Montoya. You killed my father. Or as you wish, which you have to say as you wish, because it means I love you. And have fun storming the castle. So these are our choices. I guess I don't get to vote this time, so that's fine. So we'll just.
You got to pick the movie.
It's a tie. It's a tie, and these are two very good ones. It's hello, my name is Inigo Montoya. You killed my father. Prepare to die. Stop saying that. Or have fun storming the castle. It'll never work. So now we all know how the polls work. So now we are going to pick our topic, and I am just grabbing this at random. Is there anything interesting on this? Okay, I'm not grabbing it at random because I'm looking ahead of time. Yeah, let's do this one. So I think one of these we may have already done, but that's fine. We're allowed to do them again. So our choices for our topic are bottom snare mic, essential or stupid, mono PA versus stereo PA versus LCR, which we did on our last show, but we can do it again. On off versus mute buttons on consoles versus other things that drive you crazy on consoles, an SM58 versus anything but an SM58, your favorite console, your least favorite console, and crank up genie towers. Are they the spawn of Satan? For whatever reason, my voting's not working, but I would go with crank up genie towers are the spawn of Satan, but I don't get a vote this time. So I've got enough in, and I pretty much knew where this was going to go, but we're going to talk consoles, kids, because we're just a bunch of sound reinforcement geeks who like to talk consoles. And Tom, I know you haven't touched a console in 37 years, but other than a Riedel console, but you will definitely be asked to join in as well. So I did share that, right? Yep. Anyway, we're on favorite consoles. I'm going to pick Joe to start us off because he's a new guy and I like picking on the new guys. Favorite console, least favorite console, begin.
The one that does the job.
Well, that's a lame answer.
Uh,
That is not at all like disagreeable. The one that does the job. Come
It's
on,
like the it depends answer. I mean, you know,
yeah,
come
come
on.
on.
It's
come on,
cheating.
give us at least a little bit. Like I prefer it to work, or I prefer it.
Hey, your favorite console that does the job and your least favorite console that does the job.
With your most difficult source and most difficult audience.
I just did a job with you with a console on a pool table that did the job, but I don't think it was your favorite console. So expand a bit more.
Especially since it had a bunch of bad faders and the flying faders were a little luckily I didn't actually have to mix. I was just routing. But I mean, if I had to pick one, I love my CLQLs and I love my Digico SDs, but for different reasons. I'm certainly going to use them in different environments. And, you know, I'd much rather have a Yamaha CLQL for like a one-off corporate gig, but on a big TV show or something like that, I'd much rather have the flexibility and power on the Digico. On the least favorites, I've never been all that fond of Avids. I really have one brand that is at a venue here in town that has informed me that I could be fired if I talk bad about this brand.
Excellent. I am so glad that I've been able to achieve, and we got Joe fired, because that's what I was going for. Like, oh, if I could only just start a silly like YouTube thing that 3 people watched and also get my friends fired, that'd be ideal. So you can say it's not your favorite and then give some reasons why it's not your favorite. Maybe you'll only get half fired.
So Soundcraft Studer. The Studer sounds great. The Soundcraft sounds great. The Soundcraft is very easy to walk up and learn, but they seem to like to just crash in the middle of the show.
That's quite all right. It was a suggestion, not a rule. And I agree with you. So please elaborate, because I'm completely in agreement with you. I have said that I've only had like 3 or 4 like, you know, show crashing like console failures, and it has said Soundcraft on the console every single time. So you get scarred by that, like especially since I probably only less than 5% of my mixes have been on Soundcrafts, and yet every single catastrophic failure has been with a Soundcraft. So yeah, I've got my scars.
I mean, I've had a catastrophic failure with just about every single brand I've touched, so I'm really good at breaking things.
Well, that's a gift. That's an achievement.
What's the common element there? Is what I'm thinking.
Like I said, I'm really good at breaking things. No, I think I'm the only person who, in the first 3 years of their existence, locked up a 5D. I definitely had a Digico D series have hardware failure in the middle of a show. You know, it's really fun being the system tech, running out to front of house and literally lifting one console up over your A1 while he's mixing on another surface, and then trying to drag the entirety of a D5 live around in front of him so that he could look at the stage while he mixed. I still love the Digicos. I still will always love the Digicos, even with that experience.
Yeah, Bill Mills is on here fairly frequently, and he and I's first experience with Digico, again, it was only one experience, but it's like it becomes a scarring event that's hard to get over, and so I still kind of, you know, turn askance at. I did have something recently where it was like that was one of my choices for big boy console to bring in, and it was either that or an S6L, and I was like, I'd rather have the Digico, but they brought a D5 into his shop and managed to make it fail within 30 minutes in the demo, because we mixed on it too fast.
I mean,
so
I had a similar, well, I didn't, but the stories from when Wolf Trap was looking at buying their first D5 and then ended up buying the console, but they had, you know, an iPod or CD player or something, whatever was the equivalent at the time, maybe a Zune.
Zune.
But and then a Fostex on the meter bridge, and the console locked up, and the response from Digico at the time was, well, you should have used more of the console.
What? There wasn't enough audio in it, and it lost interest. Like what is that? That doesn't like and whatever. Dave, talk to me about your console choices so I can mock you for a second time.
My two favorite consoles has to be PM10. Love the PM10. After that, especially if I'm doing any corporate show, it has to be a PM10 or even a CL5, something around that range. If I have time to program a music show of any kind, I actually do like the Digicos. I like the SD10, the SD, what is the new one? The SD 12, 21, 12, whatever it is.
Well,
Any
12
numbers.
is the newest SD.
Yeah. I actually quite like Digicos for music application, but for anything else, I prefer the PM10, hands down.
And now you have more
the new
options.
PM5.
Yeah, now you have more options, and the PM3.
PM3, PM5, I obviously have not gotten to play with them yet, but
Right, like everyone else.
exactly.
Yeah.
But if you've used a PM10 or a PM7, you know what it's going to be. It's the same thing, just different footprint, slightly different DSP. I will say with a Digico, the new Spice Rack and Mustard is phenomenal. So much so that you don't have to use outboard stuff. If anybody's been following any of the Scoville stuff with actually timing inputs, you can actually do everything on the console, which is what I also like about Yamaha. The PM10 is everything I need is right there. I don't need to do a Waves server and all this extra stuff.
Waves.
Nobody
There's a thing.
needs to do a Waves server.
You don't need to, but I got to tell you, the C6 on Waves, I love that thing. It's like glue, but the latency on it is terrible.
Yeah, well, and I will say, like, and I'm not that tweaky for given that you know what we all do for a living. I'm really not that tweaky, and yet I'm like kind of tired of the sound of the C6. It's like everybody piles it on everything now, and it's just, I mean, it's that whole thing of like,
Sounds like FM radio.
yeah. It's
Is
just,
it
it's
the
like,
C6 or all dynamic EQs?
Multiband
it's just-
compression.
I just think
Sounds
it's
like FM radio.
I think it becomes a very easy. I mean, I think it's a fantastic tool. I use them all the time, but at the same time, it's like, oh, so we'll just put one on everything, and so then everything. It just, I was talking with one of my fellow church musicians like 6 months ago, and I have like a 10,000 member church that I go to here in Georgia. So it's all big boy consoles and big boy stuff and real people who know what they're doing. But like they did a big Christmas production thing. So anyway, I'm talking to him. He's the bass player. And I'm like, man, you guys sounded great. But like they were up on this big high riser way above. And then there was a bunch of drama stuff that happened down in front. And I said, you guys sounded great, but I got to be honest, like it took me 20 minutes to realize that actual humans were playing this music, because it was so produced that I'm like, it just sounded like a record. And at a certain point, it took away from it. Like there was no huge visual of them right in front of you.
Like there was no dynamics at all?
Yeah, it was just, everything was in this like tight little, and it was like, I'm so not that guy, but I'm like, it was just too perfect. Like it just,
those tools were all fine and dandy when you had like one or two channels of it.
Right.
But now, like the BSS 901, like that was great. You have
Or
to
buses,
use it
individual
once.
buses, groups of instruments
Right.
that are behaving differently.
Or on your whole mix.
Yeah. Right.
But yeah, I would agree, Brian.
see, this is my goal. make everybody agree with me. That's all I care about. Tim, please talk to us about something other than live sound consoles, because these guys are, and you're muted. I'm not hearing you. There we go.
There, sorry about that.
All good.
I'm from the broadcast world, so we work with the truck, the broadcast console that arrives in the truck, and it's in Europe, it's Lavo, and in North America, it's Calrec, and I know the Calrec, don't know the Lavo. We always have to bring a guy in to show us, but those are the two I'm familiar with, and they seem to never run out of DSP and do massive shows on them.
Yeah.
But I don't hear them amplified the way you do, though. So I'm.
Well, in some ways you do. Well, I mean, yeah. I mean, I will say I've mixed on Lavos like 3 or 4 times, and it's one of those, oh, infinite everything is nice, but then it all comes down to like stupid stuff. Like if you don't recalibrate the touchscreens every day, then the teeny tiny little things you have to select are in the wrong place, and everything turns into a hair put. Like
I thought that was Digico.
Probably also true.
That too.
That was the D series, and then you had to carry a business card to clean the gunk out of around the bezel.
When I first was introduced to the Digico, I was taking a training with a guy who came over from England to train me on it, and that first screen with the however many 150 buttons or whatever there is on it, he had his index fingernail about a half an inch long and filed to a point so that he could hit the buttons.
Pink.
Yeah. And after 2 days of training, I blew up the console, and it was like, okay, I'm done. And I'm still done.
That's awesome.
Even though they've gotten much better, that first screen is still there.
Well, it does become, you know, if you have a like bad experience early on, and I'm a stickler for lots of little things. I could care less that I can put 4 million plugins in and route it to 4,000 buses or whatever, if when I push the thing, it doesn't do the thing. Like that to me is like, get that part right. And then this is I will badmouth Avid because I won't get fired by anybody. That is my thing with the SXL, is my couple of times on it. Just the ergonomics are just
I'm
silly.
currently mixing on an SSL.
Not an SSL, sorry, an Avid, an S6L.
Oh,
very,
S6L,
very different.
right.
Yeah,
which
yeah,
I
yeah.
can never even remember the name of. So
yeah, they even sound similar. But the Avid desk, and it's kind of infuriating because I was never a big Avid guy, but the physical buttons on the profile stuff and the SE48s and everything, and the big little, you know, mushroom top knobs and stuff, whatever. It was very like tactile, and like it you could feel it, like it all kind of worked. Like the buttons were very solid and everything was like, it was fine. Like it all worked. And I wasn't a huge fan of all the like plugin world and all that stuff, but it was fine. But the S6L, it's like, you know, my fader layer buttons are chiclets that are like, you know, the size of half of my fingernail. Like the one thing that I'm going to be hitting 47 times every minute is the smallest, hardest thing for me to find on the comp. It's just little stuff like that. Have you guys ever mixed a live show?
Hey, so I'm getting the feeling that we're talking about current standards favorites versus all-time favorites.
Well, and thank you for that swerve, because that is a great swerve. So swerving in that direction, Jason Glass, what is your all-time favorite? And I've got my list of those as well. All-time favorite, and then we can start, you know, really ragging on like the crap that we hated.
Exploding the whole topic.
Right.
So
okay.
All-time favorite, Midas XL4. All-time least favorite is actually tied between a Tech Scorpion and the Paragon 2.
See,
the ATI Paragon 2.
And I like the Paragon 2. It didn't work, but
the Paragon 2 is tied with my favorite for sound.
Right.
But reliability, we repaired it every day, every day in the field. So
what, a Maddox?
Yeah.
I never had the pleasure.
Yeah. Shipped with 2 road cases full of spare parts. I mean,
Yeah.
factory packed
And-
spare parts trunks.
And you had to have an orange dead blow hammer to reseed all the cards.
I had a Paragon 2 out on the road with Lone Star for about a year, and we had this thing. The bass player, he'd be playing, and we developed a communication. He'd start leaning to one side and looking at me, and I'd cue his mix, and his mix was drifting in image over to one side. And after a while, we figured out I would put my elbow down into the bus and press it back down into the strip connector, and it would snap back to center, and I would have to sit there with it. And if I got back up to mix something else, he'd start going like this again.
But at what point is he just screwing with you? He's just it's just like, if I lean, it'll make Jason also like put his elbow in the middle of the console. So
but it showed up in the cue bus, so I'd cue it up, and there it is. I could hear it. It was real. Yeah. Night after night. And we sent it back to the shop. And I got another story about a Paragon 1 out on the road with on the George Strait Stadium tour in 97, I think. Faith Hill had Buford Jones out in front of house. And he had an original Paragon, and one afternoon, blue fire and smoke shot out, not of the power supply,
out of the actual console.
And Rex Ray came, they flew him in, and between like 3 or 4 in the afternoon when the fire came out and 7:30 showtime, Rex had the console back up and running. And Buford continued to carry that console for years.
I mean, it's not going to catch on fire twice. Like, what are the chances?
I went to see Martina McBride with John McBride mixing, and he was using.
I was going to say Paragon. Somebody's
using a Paragon.
That was an awesome mix. John knows that console.
All he used is the faders. All the preamps are in the rack. All the EQs are in the rack. He just uses the faders because the console wouldn't hold up long enough. It was so funny. His giant console and nothing but faders.
Andy, boy, great. Didn't that sound good though?
That's the quality of the inputs too, though, man. That band is dialed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, my one of my favorite, like, just, and it's one of those, I don't want to throw anybody under the bus because I fully understand that there's a 1,000 things that go into it. But Martina was the opener, and Reba McEntire was the headliner. And so it was an old beat big black Paragon for John to mix Martina, and a Harrison show console for Reba, which was functional for the show. I was actually the show caller on the show, which is a whole nother crazy story. But it's a big thing, leukemia ball thing in DC. But basically, I mean, John had like the Paragon, and a very basic outboard rack of stuff, 40 inputs, done. And, the show console is, all singing, all dancing, all jumping around, all everything. The opening sound of the opening act just completely blew the headliner off the stage. And it's like, it's, it's not just the fancy console, it's the everything. And like I said, I don't even know for sure who was mixing her at the time.
Ricky Muller.
And quite frankly, who knows? Half the console could have been broken. Like I don't, but it was just interesting to,
if it was
like looking
console,
across.
Half the console probably was broken.
Yeah. I mean, they could have been having the worst day of their lives. And, I was buried in the like other stage stuff and the all the talking head stuff and everything else that I was dealing with.
Well, if this was at the Hilton Ballroom, just knowing how to fit the mix to the room probably superseded any hardware considerations.
Right. Actually, this one, believe it or not, this one was in the convention center. This was like, this was like big, the old convention center. Yeah. But it was like, I don't remember, like several thousand people at Rounds or something. It was an enormous.
That was like
what time frame? What time frame, Brian?
Mid late 90s.
I was on that
little
in
bit
94, 95-ish with the opening act.
It would have been later. It would have been later than that because I was freelancing. So it would have been like 99 or early 2000s. Now that I think about it. So
Remember,
no,
I was going to say,
please.
do you guys remember when Scoville was the Paragon 2 rep for about 5 minutes? Before
I was
Avid
carrying
bought
a Paragon 2 when that was going down, actually. Yeah.
For about 5 minutes, he was the guy. You had a picture of him with a Paragon 2, and the next picture was, oh yeah, I'm doing Avid now. Or it wasn't Avid at the time. It was Digi whatever.
Digidesign,
right?
you know, because that's yeah, I remember Digidesign when it was like, oh yeah, we make MIDI software, you know. So
Right. That was,
they moved a couple things. Tom, give us your console story, because I feel like somewhere in that that green-haired brain of yours, there's something to do with a console that will be entertaining for the rest of
The
us.
last console I actually really worked on was back in Theater Tech days, PM4000. So
4K.
way before digital. This was the PM4000 that actually still had tubes in it, I think.
I carried a 4K for 10 years with John Michael Montgomery from 94 to 04.
And it
the
failed.
job.
And it failed never.
Never. Not
I have a
once.
picture to share with you of a console I just bought. You want to let me share my screen?
Yeah, how do I do that? Is there something I
don't
need
know.
to do to you?
As the host, control share.
Man, I don't freaking know what I'm doing. This is, you know, like I bring you in and suddenly
Put
you
it
want
in
to
as a background, Pete.
Expectation.
you
is
should be able to
pretty
just
high
press the share screen button at the bottom, right?
It's too big for the background.
I don't see a thing that enables
He's finally gonna break the internet.
something. Yeah, I don't know how to yeah, make it
breaks the
background
internet
or
every
something,
day.
because I'm not smart enough to figure out how to enable your screen sharing. I thought it was already enabled. But
You have to.
I will put it in as my background. It is a Yamaha console, I'll tell you that.
You just bought this? This is a new thing?
I haven't accepted delivery of it yet because it's back ordered.
He said he bought it. He didn't say it was a new thing.
It's true.
Well, it's reasonably new. Reasonably new. Where is it?
That could mean anything.
Where's what?
I got to figure out where I put the picture here.
Well, I feel less bad now. So I think from now, I think what I need to do is like, I need to make somebody else the host from now on, so that somebody who knows what they're actually doing. Because Pete's like, oh yeah, no, you just make the screen share. It's in your preference, in your thing. You're just doing your setup. Like,
it's down at the bottom of your screen of your full window, and it's right in the middle. It says share screen.
Well, I know how to share my screen. I just don't know how to let Tom share
That's
his
it.
screen.
We all have it. You shouldn't have to do anything, Brian.
Oh, okay.
Actually, Brian does need to click the little up arrow next to share screen and enable.
Yeah, because you've disabled it.
Yeah,
Oh.
Brian,
This is
you
a lot
disabled
like
it.
my niece's birthday party right now.
Feeling
Yeah,
like
this just
isn't exactly
went way
what happened.
sideways. like I don't know.
It's Pete's fault. He was going to show
He
us
could always
something.
send it to you in the chat message, and you
In
can
my
share it.
Or
industry,
something.
we say it's always
I must have disabled in the meeting preferences when I made this thing. I'll just make sure the next time I don't do that.
Oh yeah, host disabled attendee screen sharing is the pop-up I get.
Ah, see.
So, back to the 4K. The 4K had the concentric pots, right? Didn't those fail all the time?
No.
About how they
No.
did.
No,
There were a
only
lot
time
of
I
them.
had anything fail in the 4K was it was raining and some water got in one of the faders, but the
Yep.
next day it worked fine.
Yeah, I
10
had
years and a
water get in the
million
faders and
miles.
it worked fine. And the truck Sony blew up, and I had to do the truck mix
Right.
for the Rockefeller Center Christmas tree lighting
Yeah.
from the couple of stems off my PM4000 that had a tent empty on it.
The thing Yamaha did with it
Wow.
was that the metal work dipped down into a channel, so when water got into the bottom, it was below where all the connectors were.
I have two funny failures with PM4K series. Our front of house engineer, we had this is a 3K. A 3K, our front of house engineer, Mark Chestnut, between sound check and showtime, the temperature hit 110 degrees, and the provider of the canopies pulled the skin off a front of house without anybody knowing it in the afternoon. And when we came up for showtime, his mute on off buttons on all his channels he had to break them to get them to engage because they had swelled in the heat. The other one is the toroid in my power supply on my monitor. I had dual power supplies. It had a mechanical failure from running down the road without air ride or whatever. I had to resolder that, but in 10 years, that was my only repair.
And Jason, did it come up broken like you fired it up and it was broken like out of the truck? Or darn close to it, like one of the rails was gone or something.
It was one of those things where I fired up the console, turned on both supplies, and I saw that one supply was steady on like 118 volts and the other was varying wildly.
Right.
And I'm like, oh boy, okay. So I shut that one off. We did the show, and then next opportunity, I took the console, or I took the power supply apart and found that it was rattling on the PCB, you know.
Yeah, back in the RCI days when Dave and I were both young, it was sort of this kind of running thing. It's like we have two power supplies for our 4K, but we don't have the crossover. Like they never bought the little so it was like, so if it fails in the middle of this, like
right, it's
yeah, but in some ways that's better.
Over repatch.
And the interesting thing about that is those crossover cables worked. I would never have known it if I didn't regularly, as part of my gig, look down and see what's going on all the time. You never would have known it.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's one of those things. It's like, you know, I kind of harped on it for like several years, but the stupid power supplies kept not failing. And so it was one of those, like, you know, we don't want to spend however much money it was, you know, several $1,000s for a thing that doesn't make us any more money. Like what, you know, like it never like, so eventually I just, now Dave stayed on there longer and after this stuff got written a little bit harder, and they may have killed one after I was gone.
Yeah. And I remember telling them, they're like, well, they were in cases. If you remember, the rack mounted cases they were in had no shock mount whatsoever.
No. Why would you put shock mounts in your power supplies?
And after getting shaken around so much, they did fail. And then I remember our good friend, the owner, going, well, why are they failing? I went off. I was like, well, you know, how about, you know, putting a little insurance, like a shock mounted case?
Crazy talk.
Well, that's a fair bet with stuff like that, because the thing that kills when power supplies die is at turn on. The instances of a piece of electronics dying in mid operation is a minuscule fraction of the instances of it dying at turn on.
Well, I've done some desert gigs where thermal became an issue.
Yeah,
for sure.
Well, you can make something fail. You can always do that if you're trying to kill it.
Yeah. Has anybody ever noticed? Now that we're all talking about this, I have noticed that the 3K and 4K and 2800, which actually I worked on, they don't fail until you get below 110 volts. They really start sounding garbage below 112.
Yeah,
I do remember that.
I feel like the voltage rail would like drop just enough that it would just get a little hinky.
I remember around 112, it started sounding fuzzy, and the image would collapse and all kinds of weird stuff.
The PM3000, the PM3000, when it was launched at AES in New York, had 20 volt rails. And it was so hot you couldn't lean on it.
The console itself?
Yeah. I mean, if you
great winter console though.
Perfect.
Yeah, perfect winter console, because it was just short of glowing. It was so hot.
I blew up a 3000 one time.
Yeah, I did kill a 3000. Now a lot of it with those was, one, by the time I started mixing on them, they were like way past their prime, and had been ridden very hard. And then there was just the whole frame would flex if it wasn't well supported for the, like, you know, I think one gig I took it out
that way too.
It's like, you know, you learn, like, don't take it out of the road case, because the road case is literally holding it together. So,
yeah, Pete, even the Gambles were like that. They had to be supported.
Yeah, but you know, those crests, I have a lot of good board tapes from those crests for some reason. The preamps on them were really.
The Crest is a good sounding desk.
What was it? Was it the VX8?
Was the one
The
with
early
was
ones. The early ones. They changed them drastically in the late 90s, and they became MI.
Yeah, they became not as good. But yeah, there was a whole period through the 90s where the Crest consoles were or baby gambles. Like they were really, really good sounding consoles.
They didn't hold up, you're right, but like if you had a good R&R case or something that supported it, they were good.
But yeah, since we're talking about the old times, that's really kind of, you know, my thing that I went back to, like, favorite console over and over and over again was, I like the one that keeps making sound. Like that's like my number 1 through 5. If it keeps
picky
making sound.
Brian, what if it makes sound when it's not supposed to?
Right.
The 4Ks were the noisiest out of them all.
Hey, XL4 had a bad habit of oscillating at the frequency of your high pass filter. Suddenly start doing it. All you could do was mute the channel, turn up the input to maximum, hope that a transient came along, turn it back down.
Me ever use an XL2?
The Ramza 840s did some weird stuff like that too.
Yeah. Oh, that was a really noisy desk.
Yeah, but
well, go ahead, Mac.
Channels, you could run time code through it and it wouldn't bleed into anything.
Which one was that?
Which one was that?
The Ramza 840. The channel isolation was unbelievable.
But the I was okay with the noise floor of the 3K ish, and the 4K was fine. And then like shortly after that, I started doing all these like little corporate things. I went freelance and like did a bunch of like crappy AV gigs with a PM 1800, and was just baffled by the amount of stealth noise the console had. It was like, this has to be broken. Like I was just like I said, I mean, I have a fairly high tolerance. Like the 4K was fine for me. Like I hear what you're saying, Pete, and I don't disagree with you, but it just never bothered me. Like it was not a big deal. Like the 1800, it was like if you weren't slamming the inputs like almost into the red, like it's just.
But you couldn't. All the
no headroom.
The 2800. As soon as you got to like -8, maybe. It started to get real weird and
real crunchy, real fast.
I know on the 2800, did the 1800 also have the 6 dB steps on the preamp?
The steps, and then the fine point.
And it like made a bunch of noise when you clicked it.
Yeah, they were awful. It was just one of those.
I had to rebuild a 2800M one time because the artist went same artist we talked about the last time. She went solo and she was having a bad time. We went down to like whatever Midas smaller console was. And she's like, you know, I remember back in the day seeing Yamaha 2800 at monitors, and those were some pretty damn good shows. So can we get that console back? And the vendor had it in their attic. So I spent a month and I rebuilt it. And you know what? She never complained again about it.
There you go. Well,
isn't it funny? The 1000 was super low noise, had high voltage rails, super awesome transients. The 1000, then the 1800 stunk. The 24 series, 2408, 2404
was a
stunk,
whole different thing. Yeah,
garbage. And then you get to 3000, and all of a sudden it's a different level again. Yeah. There's like an era there where it was really weird.
The confusing, stupid part, and this is coming from a Yamaha lover, is that the naming convention was completely screwy because they went the PM 1000, then they went the 1500 series, then the PM 2000, and then the 3000. And right about when they came out with the 3000, they're like, we need a cheaper version of this, and they came out with the PM 1800.
Well,
so it was
3000 was also cheaper in a lot of ways.
It was. Yep.
There was transformers in those consoles prior to the 3000. But
and I did a bunch of stuff. I mean, the functionality was limited, but I did a bunch of stuff on 1500 series consoles and 2000s that sounded great. Like it's, you know, there, you didn't have a whole lot to work with there. And you talk about the stepped attenuators, like there was no fine, it was just 6 dB chunks of gain.
We're comparing it to consoles that came out later, but when they came out, they were pretty advanced.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. And rock solid. And that was the thing. It's like nobody before that could make a console that you could throw in the back of the truck and drive it across the country.
Wasn't
and take
the
it out
Mark
of the box.
III around during that same time frame? Some of my first shows I mixed was on a Mark III.
The PV Mark III?
Yeah, and I loved the sound of that console. It sounded just fat and buttery, I remember. I don't know. Maybe it was just
maybe it was
youthful.
youthful indiscretion maybe that made it all sound so
Well,
glorious.
you know what now Yamaha also nailed in that era was consistency from unit to unit.
That's
you
right.
know, the Soundcrafts at that time, the other
Series 4.
Yeah, Series 4 was a great console, but every single one of them sounded different.
Yeah.
Right.
So
that patch
and
bay was the
Yamaha,
best of those.
well, and they had high pass and low pass filter, which was lovely. But I digress. Yamaha had that consistency. If you walked into one on the East Coast, it sounded the same as the one on the West Coast. The other guys weren't doing that.
Well, and even continent to continent, the 50-60 cycle thing, like Midas, not.
Yeah, I got to say, I'm a lifelong Yamaha guy, and I'm looking forward to the new consoles, but I'm unlikely to ever use them because I'm not mixing PA anymore. But I am mixing corporate broadcast, and now I'm on an SSL T series, which is their sort of mid-sized broadcast console, and I like it a lot.
Yeah, it's the SSL stuff is kind of amazing. I feel like they've kind of like, made not a comeback. It's not like they ever went away, but they sort of kind of went away as far as anything remotely into sound reinforcement stuff, and they kind of came back, or even broadcast for that matter. It's like they sort of kind of had a hiatus, and then they came back. I want to hear from Karl Winkler about his experiences with consoles, because all I ever hear him talk about is other stuff.
Well,
violas.
Yeah, violas, violins, strings, bows. Yeah,
fun stuff.
That's my life. Well, it's been a long, long time since I mixed on a big boy console, but in my era was the PM3000, and I did some mixing on a PM4000, which I liked the sound of a lot. Those consoles really had the ergonomics down, and I liked. They're easy to get around on. I felt like the PM3000 compared to some other consoles I encountered at that time didn't sound that great. But the way I would describe it is that the EQ just didn't seem to have the meat to it somehow. Like you had to kind of crank it and widen it up and fiddle with it, where other consoles, including even the 4000, was just like, oh yeah, there you go. Turn a knob and something happens and it's quick. But I got used to the 3K. I do remember doing a benefit concert down in Pensacola with Bob Hope, and Tony Bennett was going to be on the show. And they brought in a rental system, including the 3K from Baton Rouge. I don't know why, but that thing was a disaster. It was the only time I ever saw one that was so messed up that we couldn't use it. We had to unpack our entire truck and dig our console out of the truck. Luckily, we had it. Tom Young, who worked with Tony, was very patient and kind at the time. We got it hooked up. We got it running. The show started a little bit late, but everything was fine. But we took that console all over the United States and to Japan, on tour with a big band and with a 44-piece band. And, I really never had any trouble with it at all. So I got to like it a lot. So that was, just ergonomically and functionally, it was my favorite console to work on. I did play around with the very early Yamaha digital consoles, including the 01. And it was totally, the way I would put it is they had to learn a lot of lessons about, user error could really nuke, the show. In other words, I remember somehow saving the announce mic setup over my band setup and scrambling, to put a mix back together because I had zeroed out, this thing, stuff like that. But later on, I did some work on an LS9. I found that to be pretty easy to work with. I know it's not a great console by any means, but extremely functional and very compact and very user-friendly in many ways. So
and very bulletproof.
Yeah, just no problems. So I'm, just by default, I'm a Yamaha fan. And I remember running into those crests too in the mid to late 90s. And I agree, they sounded great, but I had a little bit of trouble getting around because things were labeled differently. The ergonomics seemed a little funky to me, just from what I was used to. But, I didn't.
Upside down pan knobs?
Yeah, that exactly. And something about the routing.
Upside down knobs on everything.
Yeah,
yeah, exactly. But yeah, that's my experience. I'm mostly mixed acoustic music, so the noise floor was an issue a little bit with the Yamaha 3K, and it was better in the 4K. But any other console I've worked with has been quiet enough. Even like the Soundcraft Venues, which were kind of a medium format, like a 24 channel, fairly small console. Those I like the sound of a lot. They worked well for me. That's about it on my take on consoles. Like I say, haven't done any big boy shows on the big digital consoles. So I can't weigh in on those at all.
Yeah, well, I mean, but you're kind of echoing all the same kind of things. I actually remember my first time really touching a real big boy console was when I got a gig at a studio before I ever got into sound reinforcement, and it was a Harrison something dash something. I don't remember the model.
32B.
But it was upside down. Everything was upside down, and it was.
But they sounded so.
Oh,
good.
it was. I mean, it was an amazing sounding console, and the studio owner had put in a VCA automation system on it, and it was phenomenal. It did nothing but sit in the studio, and we still had to fix it every day.
Right, and it turned into the Showco show console.
No, it didn't. That's a giant myth in the industry. That
it's not a myth. The show console was a Harrison inside.
It is a Harrison inside, but the digital control of the analog circuits, they're not the exact same analog circuits that were in all those great Harrison studio consoles, like the one I did my first
I didn't say it was the same
on.
console. I said it turned into it.
Okay, but I mean, that's a myth, though. Lots of people think that show console was a failed attempt at digitally controlling existing Harrison technology. And it was a whole new thing, which is why it fell on its face.
But it was built by Harrison.
It was, absolutely. No, for sure.
It was their design.
Yeah, the ergonomics of that thing was great, though.
The feedback LEDs were awesome. Yeah. That you could see what you were doing.
One time I was on a show with it. It was a Reba show, and fortunately they had a whole day of load-in prior to the show. We were on a big corporate, and Howard Page was with them, and he spent the entire first day of load-in fixing the console.
I went through the same thing. I was with the opening act on the Reba show in about 94-ish, and Howard was there. Woody Woodard was the system tech, and Woody had done an awesome job keeping the console up and running without having ever actually been technically trained to fix its problems. And so Howard would come out regularly and get him up to date on what they had learned at that point, because it was totally experimental at that time. And man, it sounded good when it worked.
Yeah, I've never wanted a console to work more than I wanted that console to work, because it was such a brilliantly cool idea. Tom, tell us about your console that is now your backdrop, because I'm very excited about this. If this is your new mixing console, I want to know all about your experiences with this Yamaha product.
Well, it's a Yamaha. The entire console is 6 inches wide by 10 inches deep, but it's 72 layers deep.
That's what we were looking for.
Exactly, with one fader on the front.
Size matters.
Great for monitors.
Exactly.
I got my fader. I don't need nothing else. I got my fader. What else?
No,
what else do you want?
it has a USB connection to your computer, brings the 2 outputs from the computer, 2 inputs to the computer. Does all of the preamping and mixing, and it also has an ability to take, if you're playing a video on your computer and want it to go to your webinar, it has what they call a loop back knob,
right?
Which just feeds it back into your console.
Yeah, I actually thought about buying exactly the thing that you have. I have this like little cheapy Behringer USB like soap dish thing that I'm using right now that works just fine. And then I was like, well, but when I need more stuff, and I ended up getting more something. I want to hear from Ed. Mr. Casey, give me your like, especially as a company owner too, and you've been at it for a while. Like what was your favorite console to mix on, and then what was your favorite console to own? Because those are probably two very different things.
Well, I started out with the original Soundcraft 1 that was built into the aluminum flight case.
Yep.
And stuck with Soundcrafts for a good long time until I think 800B was the last one I had. And in fact, actually, my favorite console of all time was the one I actually built for the first Big Mo truck.
Oh.
But that was because it was exactly what I wanted and everything I wanted.
Right.
It just sat in the truck all the time.
Right.
But I was a big fan of the PM3500 was the first Yamaha I bought. And I was a big fan of that console.
I actually think I remember when you got that desk. I mean, it was just one of those, like, I just kind of like, DC Scuttlebutt. I was like, dude, Ed got a 3500. Like, oh, cool. Like, oh man.
Shortly after I bought that console, I had a production of 1776, the musical, with members of Congress in the cast.
Right.
And that 128 scene mute function I thought, this is just going to be perfect. And members of Congress not showing up and understudies not being there, it just all went out the window instantly.
Right. You're right back.
Yeah.
I had actually forgotten that the 3500 had that scene memory thing, because it was one of those, when we first got it, we were like, oh, this is going to be amazing. And then we tried to use it like 4 times, and reality, it basically ran straight into the wall of reality. And it was like, no, this is kind of useless. Okay. Whatever. It's,
that was definitely the show to find that out on. I'll tell you.
Yeah. Well, that was the console where I figured out, if the faders don't move, the automation really doesn't do me any good.
Right.
It's like that's
it was entirely scene mute. It was just
right.
This set of channels are on. This set of channels are off. That's all it gave you.
Yeah. Well, I remember it, and I remember thinking, oh, this is going to be super, super awesome, and trying to like shove it into a use case, and largely failing no matter what I did. So.
Yeah, it just wasn't musical theater friendly, because it had no intermediate, oh yeah, so the Senator so-and-so is not showing up. Oh shit. Bump
no
down
Ben
to
Franklin tonight.
85 from 16,
Yeah. Right. So just, move. But I will say, like, I have mixed something. I was going to say a show, but that's probably, that may be an exaggeration, but I've mixed something on every Yamaha digital console, I'm pretty sure, that they have ever made. And I have, to the best of my recollection, I'm old and fuzzy, but I don't think I've ever had one not work. In fact, I remember like I'd been, because I'm talking DMP7. I'm talking like
I was going to ask
old,
DMP7.
like the very first, and up from there. And I, was doing stuff, and then somewhere, I built a studio for a friend, and he wanted the Soundcraft something. It was a little like studio-y console. I forget. Wolftrap tried to put one.
The Delta console?
No, it was the digital console. It was like their
digital
first
328.
Yes. That's exactly what it was. Yep. And I remember, like, I'm doing something, and all of a sudden it just like froze up. And I was like, I don't understand. Like, I legitimately, like, I didn't understand what was going on. I'm like, and then I'm like, it's not, like, the lights are still on, but it's not responding. And then it's like, oh yeah, you have to reboot it. And I was like, I was completely confused, because I just it had not occurred to me that this was just a computer with knobs on it. Because
Brian, was that around the same time as the Innovasons?
Yeah, it was right about in that same. It was
a bad time for digital console.
Not a good time. Things were not pretty in digital console.
The 01V was the only good console.
They were ahead of their time.
I mean, but that was, again, beating the Yamaha drum here, but they had like started like at the MI level with like in the mid 80s with the DMP7. Like they had figured kind of how to like make this to where it doesn't crash. But I was baffled the first time I had a console that I had to reboot. Like I just didn't understand.
You know what, though, we talk about that, but like there were a lot of bands that carried those little Innovasens, and they were the best sounding bands at those. Remember when we used to have to do those radio shows? It was like 20 bands.
You know, this song was brilliant. They just did the hardware couldn't keep up with it. Nova song was fantastic. The UI was one of the best.
Yeah,
but they
Steve
built it too
Colby
soon.
used one for like 20 years in Boston, and who's the guy out of Pittsburgh that was Vertical Horizons guy for a long time? Duffy.
Oh.
Duffy had that little thing. He would show up at those little festivals and be like, "Hey, do you want the 4K or do you want the Crest?" He's like, "No, I got my own. Do you need a sound check?" "Nope, I'm good." And like his band always sounded, like right out of the box.
I didn't know that, and they are one of my favorites from back then. They always sounded great
because Brian Duffy had that little 24 channel Innovasen. He's like,
kidding.
And he would always show off. He's like, "Look, I could turn the console off and that still makes noise." Still, like, because he had the one with like the controller and the brain and the stage rack. It was like 3 pieces.
Right. Well, I mean, I do remember, like, you know, I was like pro digital console way before like there was even really a good sound reinforcement digital console, because it was just so obvious what the advantages were. But it was still the whole like turning the corner into the bafflement. So
I mean, the industry needed something solid so badly that people took DM2000s as a live console. I mean, you know, I can't tell you how many shows I've done on DM2000.
Yeah, me too.
Oh, yeah.
When we got our DM2000s at the Kennedy Center to replace the Soundcraft Spirit Live 328s, we were so happy. And we also lined up to see which one of us got the honor of throwing the 328s into the Potomac River out front.
I love that.
So how come none of you guys have mentioned the PM5D?
I love it, man. I carried one
I
for a while.
I think because we got tired talking digital and wanted to remember the old days.
Yeah,
that's probably true.
You like that PM5D?
I'm gonna go out on a limb here. Most of my musician friends are so Yamaha has the philosophy of accuracy, and the 5D and I'll say this much: the 5D RA is much more musical than the non-RA model. The non-RA model was it just laid there. It was flat. You couldn't push it too hard. It didn't do anything special with your signal.
Well,
but the 5D, the beauty of that thing was it was intuitive to operate. It always operated the same. Again, that consistency from East Coast to West Coast and around the world. And it actually had some character. If you knew how to finesse it,
absolutely,
you could find a sweet
and that
spot.
The only board you can see everything on too. You can see
and that
every
block of
parameter.
that was the
encoders
thing,
that
is
let
that
you do groups and matrices, assigning them in either direction.
Yeah.
It was the
Right.
golden
Was
child of
brilliant.
monitor mixers, because it gave you,
Oh yeah.
it allowed you to mix from faders, or it gave you all 24 sends on knobs.
Right.
So
Yep.
Beautiful.
Right.
Yeah, that double
left
click
side
to cue
panel-
and select the mix at the same time was golden, man.
Yep. That left side panel was where you lived, man. Boom. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 through 24.
The only one that topped it during that time was the PM1D.
Yeah.
I missed the control panel.
It
on
just
the
had that
PM1D.
latency. That was a problem with in-ear monitors.
And
that
the
was
sound.
Yeah,
always
but who
my-
cares about in-ear
Right.
monitors, Jason?
And the cabling
Talk
in
to
the 1D was
Nashville
nuts.
about that.
Not my problem.
Last
Multi-cables.
time we had a PM1D out was probably 10 years ago, and we were touring with J.R. Robinson, the drummer, and for a while through Avioms, and to get the Avioms to sound right, we had to saturate them to clip on that analog AD whatever analog on-ramp
Right,
thing.
yeah.
And then we switched over to Studer SRs, and the minute he stepped up there and started playing, we had to turn everything down like 10 dB on the outputs of everything else was the same. Gain stages, everything. We even scoped it out. And it had to do with the transients through the Studer were just so good. and it got him the sound. You know, it turns out he was just turning everything up to get some saturation out of his drum sounds that the Yamaha just
The
Yeah,
only
wasn't
only
providing
gig
it.
I ever mixed monitors on was a PM1D. That was America's Got Talent, and I got the gig because it was a PM1D and I could mix on it. And a friend of mine was taking 2 weeks off. So
love that console.
I do have
Yeah.
to say that we had an incident about 7 years ago on the west lawn of the Capitol in which a microburst came through and the front of house tent reared up and the center tent pole in the front slammed into the center of the 1D about 10 times. And the rain got into the console. And so it's a 1D, a 5D, and an LS9. I can tell you right now, there were a couple of dents on the surface of the 1D and it worked fine. The 5D had no damage and the LS9 was inoperable.
Well, wasn't it inoperable before you started?
Well, there is that.
Damn.
Really?
Yeah, I will say, and I am literally the biggest Yamaha fanboy probably on the planet, and I still like when they came out with the LS9, I was deeply disappointed. That's all I can say. I was just like, and we're not even talking about the sound. It was just, this is like,
I found it very hard to operate.
it was
that
it's
screen
poke,
is
poke, poke, spin, spin, spin,
worst.
poke, 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 spin, 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 poke, 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 poke. It was just,
Yeah, and the knobs weren't like, if you spun them fast, they went all the way up.
Right.
yeah, it was just,
Headroom whatsoever.
yeah,
It was a
no,
console.
it
No
was,
headroom.
You had to have the computer hooked up to it. It
That's
just
what I was
wasn't-
going to say. You have to
the
have
Surface.
Steve in
The
there.
Surface wasn't enough console. You had to have the computer hooked up to it.
Yeah.
yeah, no, that was, I mean, it really was true. Like, I actually, not that long ago, working for a company now based out of Frederick, that I actually had to work on an LS9. I hadn't seen one in years. This was only a couple of 3 years ago, right before I moved down to Georgia. And it was just sort of and it was like 4 inputs. Like, it was, it was just what they had in the shop, and it was fine. I mean, it made sound, it did what it was supposed to do, but it was just, oh, I remember why I hate this. I kept poking the screen and it kept not doing a thing. Like, I'm like, why is this not? Oh, right.
That was lucky
Well,
enough.
when I was using
Check.
the PM1D on America's Got Talent, it only needed 4 inputs too. I mean, it's total track show. It's
Yep.
To go back for a minute, I would say though that time period after 4Ks and like the H3000 was around, I liked the H3000, but I was really glad when the 5K came out and people had them. I just remember I was doing something, had a 5K brand new, and those TC Electronic. It was for doing monitors. TC Electronic came out with that EQ with the umbilical and the remote.
yeah.
Claire.
And the motorized faders.
What was that
Yeah.
called? Do you guys remember?
Station.
The model? Was it?
6015 maybe.
There was a
Claire
black one and a
Brothers.
silver
EQ,
one.
Yeah.
EQ station.
EQ
Claire
station,
was
that's
black.
it. Yeah. Yeah, and I just remember the vendor had those, and they had the original Martin LE700s with pip card settings, and I was blown away by I had a stacked rig H3000 and 5K. I used the H3000 with like Clark 360s or whatever, and then the 5K, and I went out there to just like the first day of the thing to get everything sounding great, and I was blown away by, like, I was like, Yamaha finally fixed everything about the 4K we didn't like, and then they like I don't know, I really enjoyed the 5K a lot.
Yeah, I feel like the PM5000 was like, it was almost set. Like, if I had been on the design team, I think I would have been heartbroken, because it's like we finally we made like the console that like we always wanted to make, exactly in time for nobody to want it anymore.
Yeah, but right in time though. I mean, I used that thing for a good solid 2 years straight, and using the faders the way you could, I would do these TV shows where it's like a studio band and then, soloists, like 5-6 soloists, but we would
Hey,
max it
one
out.
thing we haven't talked about yet
Yeah.
is in all of audio, but particularly with consoles, is the musicality, the way a piece of equipment lends itself to a musical, pleasant product versus accuracy. And what you're talking about is when Yamaha went through that change before the PM5000, it's well known that Japanese engineers before that point their focus, their actual corporate directive was to be as linear as possible. You reproduce the source, period, no matter what, even after summing, everything. And while people like Midas and ATI and API and Neve, what they were striving for was a final product that was pleasant to the ear versus linear and accurate. And I think that's right around when Yamaha made that turn around the corner and started to realize, okay, and what we haven't talked about here, that difference. If you're doing a corporate show with talking heads, linearity may be what you need.
That's exactly what I want. Yep.
Right. Gain before feedback, intelligibility.
Yeah, but
versus
a lot
14
through those
people on deck.
You know, versus
Well, it's
linear,
subjective.
Yeah, totally.
It's totally subjective. But when you're summing a ton of inputs, and here's another thing, and you know, a lot of what happens outside of the range of hearing for human beings, 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz, happens in the hypersonic range that we can't hear on an individual input basis. But when those sources mix together, they produce harmonics and intermodulations that are down within our hearing range. And in real life, in an orchestra hall, we hear those products. In an electronic device that cuts everything off at 20 kilohertz, we might not. So the better analog consoles of the old days, there was a lot going on in those things, up to 50 kilohertz in their summing amplifiers, in their mix buses, that no, they were not audible per channel. But when you're summing channels and they become nonlinear, they're creating products that become subtly audible down in our hearing range.
If you're talking about that piece, your console goes out, and let's say it's your perfect harmonic convergence console. It did everything right. Still hits your speakers, and you're not reproing that through the speakers, through the PA system, support system. It's not coming out.
It can also happen electronically and become an electronic signal 100% that is reproduced.
Yeah. Well, intermod can certainly be intermod can certainly happen under 20K. Can happen under 10K.
Yeah. And the harmonics
some of these
between
products
the
are in the hearing
components, and that's what Jason. I mean, those harmonics are. You're absolutely right.
Well, this
and they're very subtle. They're so subtle that that's why it's subjective. It's even in blind listening tests, it's very difficult to determine the difference between a mix that's completely linear and one that's linear with pleasant artifacts.
This is
and
where
that's why we have
win.
plugins.
The PM10 is going to win because you can adjust that control. You can decide how do you want to go completely linear? Do you want to have what sort of hair do you want to put on your preamp?
Yeah,
it's adjustable now.
Right, but
they're
it is
they're going to win, and that's why they're winning.
And but it is interesting that Yamaha in particular was absolutely obsessed with linearity, absolutely obsessed with it all through the 90s up until the early 2000s, and then they finally went, "Oh, we get it now."
Well, and it's interesting because I have always felt a little out of step with everyone because I've always preferred that linearity. I've always preferred working in that world. I've always been more. I did a symphony show for a company out of Hagerstown in Maryland. I keep making these references because I like watching Dave smile. And basically, you know, I was brought in just to mix the 1 year because the owner of the company always mixed the show, but he couldn't do it that year. And he heard I had done some symphony stuff. So he's like, you know, fine, I'll get Brian, you know, I guess you'll be okay. And
I also have a backstory to this as well.
Oh,
so, great.
Well, hopefully I'm telling some parts of it okay. But anyway, yeah, he was probably like, oh, and I'm sure it's going to be terrible. But then he asked me, like, you know, what do you want to mix the show on? I've got an XL4, I've got an XL3, I've got a PM4000, I've got a whatever. And I said, I want the PM4000. And I literally could hear him, like his jaw hit the ground over the phone. He was just like, why would you ever want the I don't understand. Why would you, what, you know? But I was like, you know, just trust me. This is what I want. Just give me the 4K. That's what I want. And he gave me the 4K and I mixed the show, and Dave may know better than I do, but I do know I didn't get fired and I got paid, and he told me it sounded really good. And he did say something to me about, you know, he was really surprised that it actually sounded pretty good. And it was like, it's not that I was doing anything magic. It's just that was the tool I had always mixed symphonies on. And so I was going to get a better product out of a 4K than I was going to get out of an XL4, because this was the tool I was. Now, maybe if I mixed another 50 shows on an XL4, then maybe then the end product would have, I don't know, maybe not. But, you know, that was what I was used to. Like, what I put, what's coming in is going out, and what I control is what I hear, and there's nothing extra going on. And if I don't like it, I got to change the microphone. And, you know, all that stuff was just part of my workflow and part of what I did. And, you know, and then I was able to get a good results, you know, and in weird outside, you know, conditions. But yeah, so I've always, you know, I've always felt like I was out of step, because nearly everyone else is like, oh, but I really like the sound of this console so much better. Those, you know, it's like, I'm just sort of like, I just want it to do what I tell it to do. But that's, you know, that's fine. That's what makes this, you know, that's what makes this roundtable so interesting, is that everybody kind of comes at it from a different position. So I'm gonna cut us off, only because we're way over my normal time. I'm gonna cut us off of YouTube. So everybody say goodbye to the YouTubes. I'm sorry, say goodbye to the YouTubes. Bye.